All right, it's Coach Schuman here for Success for Life podcast, back with another great guest. We got Shawn Khorrami on here today. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's taken quite a few businesses and have made them wildly successful. We're going to try and figure out and find out how he's done that. He obviously also has a platform that he goes and helps other businesses to be successful as well. Welcome, Shawn, to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
So, serial entrepreneur, which I think has its own personality in itself that makes it unique. I've been an entrepreneur, but I've been in the same type of business for a pretty long time. So, but I understand what it's like. But I think it's wildly fascinating that you started multiple businesses, made them very successful. Give everybody a little bit of your background, where you came from, and how you became an entrepreneur and your interests in multiple different areas.
Yeah, well, I mean, being a serial entrepreneur, sometimes I faulted to having a lack of attention span. But I I've always wanted to be running my own business ever since I was a little kid, and in part, probably because of father. I'm from Iran. I'm an immigrant, first generation. In Iran, my father had a construction company, and as a you might imagine, as a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, going to a construction site, climbing all over these bulldozers and what have you, it was quite entertaining and quite inspiring. So I always thought I was going to do something having to do with construction. We had to move over here because of the Iranian Revolution, and my father was never really able to reconstruct his business because you got to imagine, as a 45, 50-year-old guy moving to an entirely different country, entirely different language, and economy. It's not that easy. So he did manage to get his hands on a couple of small income properties, which he was having a very terrible time managing, and he was doing really bad with it. So at the age of about 16, this is right about when personal computers are really getting into homes, I decided to help my dad. I became an entrepreneur quite by accident. It was really just to do that, to fix whatever the problem was he was having. So I constructed this really basic database program. I had put together a little system for marketing and advertising and dealing with the issues of these income properties. And it went so well for my dad that he came to me and said, "Hey, by the way, I got a whole number of friends that are in the same boat as me." And so he introduced me to them, and that's how that business began. Um, I've always been a firm believer in formal education. So I sort of got rid of that business and went to college. Although, by the way, as life has gone on, I've discovered that formal education is by no means a prerequisite to success in business or life. But for me, that kind of cramming of information into your brain and that kind of getting a theoretical overview of things was very important. And so I went to college. I got degrees in mathematics, computer programming. I backed into an economics degree. I got a law degree, and I've had formal education, meaning not an actual degree, but a lot of formal education in accounting, marketing, sales. And as you can see, it's sort of the backbone of what you would need to run a business, at least in my mind, was all of these things that I sort of put together. Going through college, I never really thought about getting a job. I had, classmates that would be sitting there trying to apply to different things, different industries they're trying to get into. That was not really my thing. I always knew I was going to go do my own somehow form my own business. And it wasn't until recently, in the past few years, that I realized, when talking to my wife, I said, I've never done a resume. I've done bios, but I've never done a resume. I've never worked for a company and received a W-2 from a company that I haven't owned. It just was something I hadn't even thought about. And so The reason primarily I ended up doing multiple businesses and running multiple businesses at once was really that I would get into a business and I'm an assembly line guy. So I'm looking at different processes and how to sort of make them better, make them more efficient, things that cost the business a lot of money or are very difficult things or risky things, and sort of reducing that to something. And in creating those efficiencies, I would walk into a separate business. Sometimes because creating the efficiencies, meaning fixing that problem, was itself so costly that I would have to make it another business. I would have to make it, market it to different places in order for that cost of creating it to make sense. So that's really the way I got into multiple businesses at once. And I'll give you an example. I was running a business that used a lot medical records, medical archiving, things like that. And it was a big issue for the business. So what I did was I formed a medical archiving and medical records business. I actually marketed it to my competitors, and then I figured out other uses for it, how other industries could use a similar product, and how I could market it to them. That business became a bigger business than the business that inspired it. So that over my lifetime has kind of been the way I've constantly been running, 2 and 3 and 4 businesses at once, because of that kind of a thing, and also because I just end up having interest in multiple things. So in terms of what I've run, it's been sort of evenly divided between services and products. I've also done SaaS companies, and so what happened over time was, and this is another conversation I had at some point with my wife. I said, what I really enjoy is that journey from going from zero to having a lively business with employees and projections and all these different things that are going on. Because to me, large businesses, and this happened when one of my businesses got large enough, there's so many stakeholders. There's so many different. There's so much investment and all that stuff that's put into that business that the risks are to me not as much, and so it's not as fun to me. And also, you lose your ability to make some of those decisions because of all of those different stakeholders. So I decided, I wanted to concentrate on small and medium-sized businesses. And by the way, over time, look, not everything was a wild success. No one who started multiple businesses has had all these wild successes, even the most famous of them. There's always a lot of failure involved as well. And it's because of some of those failures and because of some of those successes that people started just coming to me to sort of what I consider to be mentoring. That became its own business where I started saying, oh, geez, you have this problem. We can work together in this fashion, and I ended up having all these different joint ventures with small and medium-sized businesses where we would create a goal and together sort of go and address it or make it a success. So that over time became what I do, which is joint venturing with small businesses in order to accomplish a given goal.
So let's talk about juggling multiple businesses at one time.
Sure.
How, and I think people find this intriguing because when a person focuses on one business, most people understand the success failure of how to do that. It fails for certain reasons, succeeds for certain reasons, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But juggling multiple businesses and making that successful, what are some of the things that you have to have in place, competency wise, personnel wise, and product wise in order to make that successful? Because I could imagine that being a very difficult task, because if you don't put enough energy into each one, they could all fail, right? So you end up serving multiple masters by having multiple business. How have you been able to make that work?
So, so that in terms of the person, meaning me, um, I think you have to have certain qualities. One of them is being very compartmentalized. When you're focusing on one thing, that's what you're focused on, because you're going to have all these different fires that are happening, which I particularly actually enjoy, like jumping around and looking at different things. But when I'm looking at one thing, I'm very concentrated on that thing. So being compartmentalized is a big deal. It is difficult to be a micromanager if you're running different ventures at once. So you tend to be more of a generalist, in my opinion, and that's how it's worked for me, where you have to really, really make sure that you put together, and this leads to the next thing, put together the right teams. That's true whether you're running one business or you're running 10 businesses, right? You need to have the right team, but it's particularly important. I don't think it's possible if you don't actually sit there and make sure you're team building properly at each level, and trusting those teams and making sure that there's proper reporting and proper structure to those teams. So whenever I look at a business, I immediately start looking at, oh, okay, wait a minute. Like, even if I'm evaluating it. So if someone comes to me and says, hey, what about this in my business? I'm immediately looking at the structure and what team they have. Because to me, if you don't have those things right, it doesn't matter how many businesses you're running, you're really reducing your ability to actually make those businesses successful. That's not to say that there are not those people that just sit there and just through sheer will make their businesses work. And they're micromanaging everything. They're able to keep their hands on everything and push everything forward. But if you're going to actually grow it, to me, you're going to need that. So in terms of the personality of the person that would be running multiple businesses, those are the three traits that I think are most important. There are obviously lots of others, but those are the three that I think are most important to have as that person.
What is it about serial entrepreneurship and having multiple businesses that drives you? Is it the variety? Is it now, are a lot of times these businesses related to each other, or like complementary business, or are they totally unrelated businesses that require different competencies?
Um, I've I've been in both situations. Like I said, a lot of times, if I'm starting the business itself and it's not just a joint venture, then yeah, they normally spring out of each other. So it would be that example I gave where you have a service that's very important to the business that you're running, and then you make that into a separate business on its own. So that is one way. Right now, I have both types of situations, because what will happen is, for example, someone will come to me and say, "Hey, I have this company that I'm running." Like a typical example would be they have a distributor relationship where, let's say, so the example would be like, for example, Nike, but I don't work with big companies like that, but Nike sells to Foot Locker or all these different retailers. So they have this distributor network that gets their products out to those retail shops that ultimately sell to the consumer. So the traditional model was, oh yeah, that's the way you sell to consumers. Even if you have a consumer brand, as you grow, that's the way you do it. That model to me is outdated. And you can see even Fortune 500 companies that have consumer products, that's what they're doing. Nike is a perfect example. It now sells shoes directly to consumers. So a typical example would be a company, a small or medium-sized company that has that distributor relationship. And then what we do is we form a separate LLC, and I will bring in my team and my company, and we will form a partnership where we manage the direct to consumer relationship for that company. We become partners in that portion of the business. They have a wonderful, great distributor relationship, that business that's going on. We create and manage the direct-to-consumer relationship. In that respect, I end up running companies that are vastly different. They may sell completely different products in completely different industries, but at the same time, look, to me, running a business, you're gonna need to, for example, that building of a team, the concept of it, or how you go about putting things together, or how you go about putting a structure together. As a general rule, there's a lot of general things that apply to all of these businesses. So you apply that, and then you bring in specific expertise within those industries.
That's wildly interesting.
I'll tell you this. I'll be honest with you. I read the equivalent of 1+ book a week. That's why I read a book. What I do is I may be reading books, but I will read guides on various things to educate myself on a daily basis. I spend, if you look at number of pages, I may read hundreds of pages a day, every single day, 7 days a week. So that's a typical thing that I do as well.
Well, I think continuing education and being able to educate yourself on everything is a key component for learning how to get business, to sell, to manage people, to lead, because things are always changing and nothing stays the same, and new technologies come out and new ways of doing things, and there's old principles that always apply, but there's always obviously new things that can be done differently to continue to grow business. So what is some of the founding principles that you have as far as helping people to build business? What are the things they need to do to be successful like you have in business?
Yeah, there's several different things. One is I'll just take your show, kind of, right, because you deal with a lot of athletes. You yourself are a former athlete, and you have a lot of athletes on your show. One thing I enjoy actually are athletes who've played team sports. That gives them tools that, to me, for example, is unusual in a lot of respects, and I value that, for example, over a lot of other traits, a lot of educational things that people may come through with. And that's because once you've played team sports in that fashion, the things that I see, the way they function within a group, and how they make projects successful, is incredibly important. You can teach a lot of other things. That is something that is difficult to teach once the person comes to you and they're starting to work. They're at that working age and they're trying to put together a career. So it is incredibly important. I've said this early. I said this earlier. Is how to build a team, how to put it together, and the traits you need in order to have that together. But more importantly, when you're looking at, and this is things that come up, you mentioned things that apply to different small and medium-sized businesses, things that are general to things. And so as I've looked at SMBs, what I noticed that come up over and over and over and over are in 3 areas, right? One is sales channels. It used to be that if you started a business, what you would have is you'd go set up a shop somewhere, open up a store, and you had a geographic area that you were marketing to, and you try to get people into that store. That was your sales channel, really, right? That's completely changed. Speaking of things that used to be a certain way, and you apply general principles that apply from back then, but things have changed, right? Now you have the opportunity to use multiple sales channels, right? You can have a physical store, but you can also be selling on Amazon. You can also be selling on Walmart. You could also, there's all these different avenues open to you where you can get on social media. There's all of these different avenues. So what I noticed with SMBs is usually what that's common to SMBs is they're underutilizing and overutilizing sales channels at the same time. And I'll very briefly say how that works. They're in the wrong sales channels and they're not in enough of the right ones. So that happens a lot. Second thing is a lot of SMBs build themselves on new customer acquisition to the exclusion of dealing with their current customers. And big companies know this, and they know it well, that it's much cheaper and much easier to market to your current customers than it is to acquire a new customer. So while it's important to acquire new customers, it's equally important to be upselling, cross-selling, creating subscription programs, and creating monthly recurring revenues. That's something that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses miss. Number 3 is in the area of logistics and supply chains. And I stole a quote from General Eisenhower, who years ago said that battles, campaigns, and even wars, and I modified it, and even businesses are won and lost primarily based on logistics. And so that's an area that, again, small and medium-sized businesses miss a lot. Now, looking at general principles to follow, another thing that happens is also, I say this to people, your product is not your business, but your business is your product, okay? And that means a certain thing. This comes up all the time, where they think their business is that product that they're selling. And this happens, for example, the best way to demonstrate it, I found, is with professional services, like a doctor. If you go to a doctor, you say, "What's your business?" They'll talk about the service they provide. That's their business. Healing people, what in general terms, healing people. That's what I do. That's my business. That is not your business. So your product is not your entire business. Your business is how your staff treats your patients, how much they have to wait, how you're getting those patients, what kind of phone mannerisms they have, what kind of ways do your patients actually are they able to communicate with you? How are you able to help them? What are the different avenues outside of them walking into your office and sitting on an examination table? What else do you do for them? So all of those things become that business, right? That's the product that you're giving to the world. So when you're selling a product, when you're Nike and you're selling shoes, right? Yes, you're selling shoes. That's not your entire business. How you treat your customers, how you deal with them, how you respond to them when they need a refund. What if a product doesn't get there the right way? What if the delivery method is not the right way? What if it doesn't meet their expectations? All of those things are the product you're giving to the world. So your business is product of your business. Next thing that people do is oh yeah, they're always adjusting their budgets. It's very important to have a very tight budget, but don't be cheap. There's two different things. There are things you should be spending on, and you should be really concentrating on those things, and there's things that you shouldn't be spending on. So run a tight budget, but don't be cheap. Another thing that probably maybe you've heard in other areas, there's a common quote that you may hear is, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." If you're trying to run a business, waiting till you have the perfect system or the perfect product that doesn't have this or the other is absolute mistake. One, you'll never launch it. Two, you'll never even know what perfect is, because your idea, your opinion of your product is not the market's opinion of your product. And people commonly make that mistake. So whatever you think is perfect may not be what the market thinks is perfect. So unless you get out there and you put that product out and you start doing stuff with it, you're never even going to learn how to improve it properly in a way that people actually want you to improve it. So these are some of the common things that come up with dealing with small and medium-sized businesses.
I think businesses in general have a hard time with figuring out multiple streams of income. So generally they get one product, right? And you're told, hone in on that product, leverage as much as you can. And then if that is no longer a hot product, they haven't leveraged it to get any kind of multiple streams of income. What are some ways that businesses can gain multiple streams of income? And maybe you could use an example of something you've done or that you've consulted on.
Well, I'll give you actually an example that I use from time to time. Company came to us, and I like using recency because that incorporates like code and all this. huge disruption that's occurred to us economically. And so company came to us, they sold humidifiers. Okay. And this is right after the lockdowns, right? So your natural thing would be, wow, you're at the right place at the right time, right? People are now concerned, have this health concern. There's these lockdowns where they're sitting at home. And of course, humidifier is one of those things that you can market to people based on its, making a more healthy, environment inside their home, right? They were failing miserably. So they had an existing business. They were selling thousands and thousands of these humidifiers. The business was failing, and they said, well, actually, we got a problem. We have a sourcing problem because we get our stuff from China. Number two, we have as we're having trouble filling these orders, we're getting all these bad reviews. And so that's caused, all this stuff is cascading, and we're in a whole mess. My first question wasn't even, what's happening with those things. My first question was, what else are you selling? What are you selling to these current customers that you have? Do you have the essential oils? Do you have the filters? No. See, and that business, was specifically focused on new customer acquisition, on a product that they're probably not going to return to you very often to buy another one, right? This is not something you're going to have a whole lot of recurring business from the same customer. So now what they have is a sourcing problem. They have a review problem. Now, by the way, the first thing that we wanted to do was go back to those old customers and say, hey, by the way, we have the other products. So adding these, just a couple of little products, and say, and we can have them delivered to you, exactly every month, as much as you need. You just, and we put together that subscription program for them, so that we could actually have something that we're sending to those customers. Now, here's what happens. Not only do you create another stream of income, not only is it a regular stream of income where month by month by month, actually we ended up acquiring that business, to tell you the truth. But this was the reason, because they were missing exactly these things. So month after month, you're getting those dollars in, okay? But those customers that you're selling to, since they have an existing relationship with you, and they're going back and forth with you, they're a lot more likely to give you positive reviews than negative ones. They're going to give you a lot more leeway when something goes wrong to fix it than a one-time purchase. And not only that, you have a lot more options, right? Because you're now offering more things to these customers. If something doesn't work right, you can offer them something else. So some way of making it right for that customer, okay? What we did was we actually changed their sourcing to a more expensive sourcing right away. So while our margins went down on the actual humidifier product, we were creating so much in revenues through all these other things, all the cross sells and upsells, that it really was not an immediate concern to us. Our thing was to be able to deliver a good product to the customer the way they expected it at the time they expected it. That was more important to us than the margins, and it should be more important. So we then turned around that business, where actually the subscription program has ended up being a bigger dollar item, bigger revenue item than selling the original humidifiers that they were selling at the time. We actually separately market those things and go, and our new customer acquisition model actually includes those other products, where we go after the customers of other humidifier businesses and grab those people and then get them to buy a humidifier from us when that time comes. So in that situation, where you would even think they would have a perfect, they're in the perfect situation where the COVID lockdowns happen, you can have a big problem if you're not doing everything correctly. Not only did we do that, we also changed around the way that we're selling. We changed around their sales channels, because they were only selling on Facebook. And to us, that didn't make sense. There was nothing wrong with selling on Facebook, but there are lots of other places that you should be selling. For example, Amazon, which they were not selling. And so we started expanding their sales channels, unlocking a whole lot of revenue that would be coming to that business, having them compete with other businesses in ways that they weren't doing before. And from there, we actually made a very, very healthy company, which now has a whole line of products that it's selling.
I'll tell you what's really interesting. So, obviously, developing those multiple streams of income and those additional services or products are huge. When it comes to the customer, going back to the customer a second or third time for additional things, how do you approach that customer? I think that's a big question that people have too, right? We sell somebody something. What is the right time to ask again? How often can you ask? Obviously, you want to always increase the lifetime value of that customer in your business, but how do you go back to them in the right way that you can get them to purchase again?
That's a actually really great question. One thing that's important that is to realize that those customers, especially with all the privacy changes that are coming up, your direct relationship with these customers is like gold. Okay, because you don't have to worry about those privacy concerns. You don't have to worry about what Apple does, what Facebook does. You know these customers. You have their information. And a lot of what we recommend a lot is just going through email, right? But you have to also realize is that those customers that you have, they're getting just hammered by email. There's email coming through, and it's all this junk that's come that what they view as junk. So it's incredibly important not to be selling all the time. What I talk about when I'm talking about email is consider that someone has invited you to their home. When someone gives you their email and says it's okay for you to email me, imagine that you're being invited into their home. And I think that a lot of people do think of it sort of that way. What? Wait a minute, you're emailing me. Um, it's kind of private to them, right? And so, when you're approaching them and you're communicating with them, imagine that's what you're doing, and start communicating with them and not selling all the time. Send them stuff, create a newsletter and send it out to your list, and not don't talk about any product you're selling. Don't try to sell them on anything. Give them value, give them information that matters with respect to areas that they would expect you to have expertise in. So if you're selling humidifiers, talk about air quality, talk about things that they can do, talk about new advances. Don't necessarily sit there and sell them on it. Get them to actually read and interact with what you're selling, and then pick certain times every little bit to go back to them and say, hey, by the way, we have this thing for you, and something, and so weave it into what you've actually been sending out to them in terms of information. So me, if I were going to pick um, principles that like most important principles is exactly what I said is treat it as their living room that you're walking into and give them information. Don't always be selling. Don't always be sending all this stuff. Oh, here's the next sale, the next sale, the next sale. They'll stop reading that. And it's going to become less and less and less effective. And eventually, if they don't unsubscribe, they're just going to skip over and delete your emails. So that's incredibly important.
I think that's one of the most tricky things with email is even with the newsletter as you're when you're providing value, right? I've personally had people that continue to go to my programs that have actually unsubscribed, but they still sign up for stuff, right? So they really don't want to get emails anymore. They like, well, we know the website, we know but when we'll sign up when we're ready. That becomes tough to send, to have continued communication, but those are still customers, right? So
Yeah.
it's really email has become, because of all the filtering and all that stuff, a very difficult thing to navigate. I remember the old days, man. You emailed, man, business came in. I mean, that's just how it was.
Oh yeah.
It's not like that anymore. It's And then, you ask, and this is kind of leads into my question. It takes a lot longer to get the sale on email, right? So you may have to email somebody 6, 7, 8 times with multiple different things in the hope that they don't unsubscribe at some point during that, to get them to purchase something. Which brings me to my question. Are there other channels that are emerging that are much better? Now, I get social media. Obviously, I sell on social media. There are different social media channels for different businesses that are good. But is there things like direct sales that are better? Is texting better? Or texting is another thing that you can end up violating, right? You got to be careful how you use that. Are there other emerging channels that are successful like the old email used to be?
Yeah, it really depends. One, it depends on the business that you're running. You mentioned social media. I know businesses that only sell through social media, right? And only through specific social media. So they'll only be selling on Instagram, or they'll only be selling on TikTok. So depending on exactly what you're trying to sell, the kind of image that you're creating, what exactly you look like to the customer, that's one thing. That's looking at social media. You mentioned text. Text absolutely is very important, but you have to be also careful exactly what your business is. A lot of text marketing right now has to do with, sort of, you're geographically limiting what you're doing. Even though you'll have national companies that are using texting to market. So I'll use an example. Williams and Sonoma does this, where they have a whole texting system and they're sending all over the country all these different texts. That generally, what I find, when I find texting effective is when you're dealing with, sort of, the local customer. That doesn't mean that you don't have a national business. That just means, where I find it more effective is there. Also, it's important to have the kinds of services that they want, right? So if you're trying to, if you're using texting for marketing to your customers and actually getting those sales in, you need to be looking at, well, can they pay through text? Can you move them through that journey? Whatever system you're using in order to do that, in order to get those sales, in order to get those current customers to come back to you and purchase more stuff, you have to be looking at the entire journey from the time that they talk to you, from the beginning of this situation, all the way through where they actually make a payment. And you have to walk that through and see exactly what they have to do in order to get to a purchase. And so if you're doing all of that, is where you're going to be successful. You're absolutely correct. Sending email just out to your customers just for fun, is not going to work. You have to have a system where you actually lead them through something, and make sure you're not being overly irritating so that they're not unsubscribing, even though you're always going to have some level of unsubscribing. That's going to happen. And then actually having a thing where they're looking for what you're trying to do. They're looking at your emails, and then you're actually doing something where they can walk through a purchase with ease, the way they would expect to do so. And no matter what channel you use, whether you're using social media, you're using email, you're using text, and those are really what I look at as the primary things that you would do to actually, do upsells, outside of if you're going to, whatever you have on your website. Those are the primary ways I see people doing it. I do like email for a lot of different reasons, but you can't ignore, other channels, and particularly social media, especially, by the way, since all of the different social media channels are constantly, ramping up their products for, businesses, so businesses can actually make those sales. So when you're looking at, for example, what, YouTube is doing,
Right.
Walmart, and here's another, way that people are advertising. Walmart just made a deal with Roku, where you can actually, select items right from the advertising. So there's a lot of new technology coming in. YouTube has that same feature, and they're introducing it more broadly, where you can actually sit there and shop right from the video. And so those are things that you need to be taking advantage of, but it has to match your business. It has to match your actual attitude, what you're projecting.
This has been unbelievable. We've got a wealth of information. Can you share with everyone how they can reach out to you? And if they want to consult with you, if they want you to partner with them on their business, like you do with a lot of the joint ventures, where can people reach you?
Well, one is my company, eplaybooks.com, eplaybooks.com. I also made it kind of easy to reach me. Connect with Shawn, SHAWN, connectwithshawn.com. That'll take you to my personal site, where you can get some information both about me and also regarding how to run businesses. And you can contact me through there. And by the way, for your audience, I just published my first book, and I'm happy to provide them with a copy for free if they reach out to me.
That's awesome. So eplaybooks.com. And what's the other one that you said again?
Connect with Shawn.
Connect with Shawn.com.
I try to make it easy.
That very easy, very easy. Perfect. It's been a pleasure having you on. I learned a ton of things. I hope to be as successful as you are one day. It's pretty awesome to see someone who's built multiple businesses, done so much in sales, as far as over 100 million in sales like you have, and it's exciting to see what you'll continue to do in the future. Anything else you'd love to share with our audience?
Well, just go out there and do it, right? I hate to steal it from Nike, as I've been talking about them, but don't let anything hold you back. Just go do it, and unless you do that, you're not going to be successful.
Absolutely. Well, for the Success for Life podcast, I'm here with Shawn Khorrami, who's done a great job explaining a lot of what I had some very tough questions for him that he answered tremendously well. I'm Coach Schuman, and until next time, we will see you soon. My book should be coming out in the fall, which is Legendary Leadership, and for the Success for Life podcast, we'll see you guys all soon. Everything will be in the show notes as well. And till next time, have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.